This movie is about Excel's subtotaling functionality. We're going to set up a subtotal, and then we're going to look at some of the options in the subtotal dialog box where we can insert a page break in between the subtotals, and we can show the summary of the information either at the top or the bottom of the data. And then we're going to remove a subtotal, simple process. And after subtotaling the data, we're going to find out we can sort the data on the subtotaled fields. And we have the ability to format just the subtotaled rows, and we can copy just the subtotaled rows to a new location as well. So I've got some data that I borrowed from a previous movie to walk through some of the subtotaling capabilities of Excel. Before we impose a subtotal on this data, we need to sort the data on the field that we want to group. In this case, it probably makes sense to group this data by customer and subtotal it by customer. We could also do product, but we have to make a decision either way because we've got to sort this data before we subtotal it. So I'm going to select a cell in column D, go to the Data tab, and sort it in ascending order. I have Circle Ranch at the top. And then to get the subtotal functionality, again, it's on the Data tab in the Outline group. Left-click Subtotal to get the subtotal dialog box. Since the active cell was in column D when I launched the subtotal dialog box, Excel assumes that I want to sort by customer, which is actually correct, but I could actually also pick any of the other column headings. I wouldn't get a good result because I haven't sorted by product, but if I had sorted by product, this is where I could go to select product to be the subtotal reference. I'm going to left-click and close that, and I want to sum, which is true, but I could also count, average, get the max or minimum of the columns that I'm going to select in the next field, or I could get the product, which is Excel multiplying the value in each cell by the subsequent value in the next cell. But sum is what I want. I'm going to left-click to close that, drop down, and then I get to select the fields that I want to apply that function, sum, to. The quantity and total fields make sense. They're selected. It wouldn't make much sense to sum on price. And I'm going to leave the default settings for the other options in place for now. Left-clicking OK. Excel has added to the left of the row headings 3 grouping levels, 1, 2, and 3. We are currently looking at level 3. And when I page down, I see that Excel has inserted on row 59 a row and input a field in column D that says Circle Ranch Total. It also has added subtotal functions in columns G and H, which were the columns that we selected, quantity and total. These grouping levels are structured in a hierarchical way where level 2 displays the subtotals and the grand total. And when I go to level 2, I get a plus box in each one of the groupings where I can expand out one of the subtotal groups without expanding, I'm going to scroll down a little bit, all of the subtotal groups because the other 3 are still subtotaled and I have my grand total at the bottom. When I go to the top level, this is level 2, except for with Circle Ranch, that's level 3. Left-clicking 1, I get my grand total for all of the data. So I'm going to go back to level 3. I'm going to left-click a cell in column D to make that the active cell, launch the subtotal dialog box again, and reset this up to make sure we're going to sort by customer, get the total and the quantity. I'm going to leave the first checkbox, replace current subtotals, check and check the second checkbox, page break between groups, left-click OK, and Excel replaces the prior subtotal with the current subtotal, although the difference was negligible because we're performing the same function on the same data, except for one thing, we've got page breaks now. Excel has inserted a page break between the first group and the second group at the bottom of row 59, the second and third group at the bottom of 114, and the third and fourth group are also split, and we have a page break inserted at the bottom of the data under grand total. Now there are a lot of other page breaks in there, but it may be a starting point for you to adjust page breaks if you want to ultimately print this data out. If you printed it out now, it would be a mess. We also have one more option in the subtotal dialog box, and that is to show the summary, and I'm going to deselect page breaks. Instead of below the data, it doesn't show where it's going to show up. We just know it's not going to be below the data. And since it's not below the data, it ends up on top of the data, above the data. So to remove a subtotal, it's a simple process. You've probably seen it already on the subtotal dialog box. It's this button right here, left click to remove all of the subtotal. And of course our data is still sorted because we sorted the data by customer before we did any subtotaling. I'm going to subtotal this data once again. By customer, sum, the quantity and total field. I'm going to show the summary below the data. Left click OK. Because I want to show you that you can sort the data by the subtotal field by going to the second level to display the subtotal field. And you can perform this function either on the quantity field or the total field. It doesn't matter. Both of them are sorted in ascending order at this point. I can left click one of these fields and sort it by descending order. Circle Ranch is currently on the top. When I sort it, Ted's Bar and Grill is now on the top, and going to the detailed level, we see the details of the transactions for Ted's Bar and Grill. Since we can go to level 2 and display just the subtotal rows, we can also format the subtotal rows. The way you do that is to select the range that contains the subtotal and the grand total rows, if you want to include that in there as well, and press Alt semicolon, and we see the bars input in between each of the ranges that have been selected, and then you can format those subtotal rows as you see fit. Left clicking off of that and going back to level 3 and paging down, we see the effect of the formatting that we just imposed on the subtotal rows. Going down, we also have it on the grand total row. Control Home to get back up to A1, selecting the second level. If your goal was to copy this data into a new location and you selected the summaries, the subtotal and the grand total, press Control C and went to a new location, Control V to copy, you're going to copy everything, including all of the detailed transactions. I'm going to delete that, and we're going to do the same thing we did before to format the rows, and that is press Alt semicolon to select just the visible cells, and then press Control C to copy, and then when you go down to paste, you're pasting just the visible cells, which is the subtotal and the grand total rows. So that's Excel's subtotaling functionality. We set up a subtotal with our data after we sorted it in the column that was going to be used as a reference for the subtotal and determine the grouping. We inserted a page break in between the subtotals with an option setting in the subtotal dialog box. We also displayed the summary at the top of the data as opposed to the bottom of the data. We quickly used the subtotal dialog box to remove a subtotal. We found that we could sort the data after we subtotaled the data by the subtotal field by going to level 2, and we can use Alt semicolon to select the data to either format it so that we just format the subtotal row and the total row, and we can use Alt semicolon to select the visible cells again to just copy the subtotal and the total rows to a new location.